This is my 1986 Mazda 626. It's probably one of the last third-generation 626s left on the road. Known as the Capella in Japan, this lineup of vehicles spanned 6 generations over 32 years. But today, many of these cars have disappeared. So what happened to Mazda's sporty mid-size cars of the past? Today, let's dive into the history of the 626 and find out.
The more you look, the more you like. The Mazda Experience.
I bought this boxy white Mazda 626 coupe a few weeks ago, and I've really been enjoying my time with this mostly forgotten mid-size car. And you might be wondering what possessed me to buy a 40-year-old, slightly worn-out Mazda coupe. And to be honest, the nostalgia center in my brain was 100% responsible. I totally remember those commercials back in the 80s with leather glove-wearing drivers tossing the 626 around on winding roads. With so many utilitarian mid-sized cars being made back then, it was a breath of fresh air for many people to see something that was actually marketed as being fun to drive. Now, these cars never sold in the same numbers as something like the Chevy Celebrity, but the 626 did have some dedicated fans back in the day. Nowadays, cars like this have mostly been phased out here in the US, with automakers focusing their attention on much more profitable and larger SUVs. This car brings me back to the days where small to mid-sized sedans, coupes, and hatchbacks were everywhere, even in use by families. Kids were stuffed into the backs of these on the way to the grocery store and school. Back then, not every parent thought they needed a Chevy Suburban. Early on, Mazda really found their niche and have done a pretty good job of sticking to it right up until the current day. Create useful, practical cars, but make sure that they're injected with a little bit of fun. Now, when it comes to these Mazda Capella-related cars around the world, there are certainly quite a few differences in naming, engines, and features depending on where they were sold. I'm going to focus most of my attention on this platform as it appeared here in the States. So let's rewind the tape, go back in time, and see how it all started for the 626 here in the US. In Japan, the first generation Mazda Capella came out in 1970 and ran until 1978 with a front-engine, rear-wheel drive setup available as both a coupe and a sedan. The rotary-powered version of this car, the RX-2, was one of the vehicles that ushered in Mazda's introduction to the North American market in 1970. The RX-2 was highly regarded in the automotive press, and demand significantly outpaced supply. Back in '72, Motor Trend praised the RX-2 as being able to, quote, make mincemeat of a BMW 2002. However, many owners quickly became dismayed by the poor fuel economy, just around 18 miles per gallon. Here in the States in '71, this platform was also offered with a 1.6-liter inline 4-cylinder, rebadged as the 616, and for 1 year only it had a 1.8-liter 4-cylinder and was called the 618. Though at the time, Mazda didn't focus much attention on these piston-powered variants, they were largely overshadowed by the rotary-powered RX-2. By the mid-70s, the fuel crisis came into full swing, and word of subpar efficiency of Mazda rotaries became widely known. Sales slowed, and Mazda even teetered on the verge of bankruptcy. It was clear that the second-gen Capella had to ditch the rotary in the US, and Mazda needed to focus on fuel-efficient 4-cylinders. The second-gen Capella, also a front-engine, rear-wheel drive platform, was introduced in 1978, but many markets didn't get them until '79.
We looked at Celica, Accord, and Scirocco, but when we looked at this new Mazda 626, that's all it took.
Just one look, that's all it took, yeah, just one look.
There were 3 engines available worldwide, but we only got the 2-liter 80-horsepower inline-4 here in the States. Once again available as a 2- or 4-door, the shape was a bit boxier and a bit more conservative than before. And this is where the 626 name started. The car was known as the 626 in most places outside of Japan. This second gen was praised for its abundant standard features, but was regarded as being slightly less sporty than its predecessor. They certainly looked cool though. The third-gen 626 arrived in the States for the '83 model year with a more modern transverse engine front-wheel drive setup. And here it was available as a sedan, a hatchback, and a coupe like what I have here.
Experience Mazda. Even from here, you know the Mazda 626 Sport Coupe is one high-performance road car.
Positioned as a sporty alternative to the more straightforward midsize cars from other manufacturers, it featured independent rear suspension. Commercials for this 626 featured James Garner and race car drivers throwing the 626 around on winding roads. This 626 was highly regarded by the automotive press, earning Motor Trend's Import Car of the Year. For the first 2 years in the States, we only got the carbureted 2-liter 4 with just 83 horsepower, and in '86 they switched over to fuel injection, with the engine now pumping out an impressive 93 horses, which is what I have in my 626. Not exactly bursting with horsepower, but Road and Track said it was just enough pep and performance to make driving fun. And Mazda built on that. In '86, they also offered a turbo 2-liter making 120 horsepower. Sales were decent here in the States, but this 626 faced stiff competition from the Honda Accord, Toyota Camry, and never really came close to selling the number of units as the sales-leading Chevy celebrity. This highly competitive category meant that Mazda once again needed to revise their midsize lineup. The 4th gen arrived for the '88 model year and gained a bit more horsepower and refinement. It once again had independent rear suspension, continuing Mazda's dedication to good handling. And you could still get oscillating vents.
Thinking of buying a new family car?
The Mazda Dealer Information Center has a great suggestion.
The all-new 1988 Mazda 626 DX sedan.
The base models now got 110 horsepower from a 2.2-liter 4-cylinder, and the 626 GT trim bumped you up to 145 horses with the turbocharged engine. This gen could also be had with 4-wheel steering, though the option was quite rare. Globally, this gen could be had as a sedan, a 5-door hatch, a wagon, but here in the US we only got the sedan and hatch, and the coupe was available as the MX-6. And fun fact, the MX-6 was also related to the first-generation Ford Probe. North American 626s were built in Japan, but the MX-6 and Ford Probe were built by Auto Alliance in Michigan. Mustang fans know the Probe as the vehicle that almost replaced the Mustang. Click above to watch my video about the Probe's history. The much more rounded 5th gen arrived in the North American market for the '93 model year and was built in Michigan. This was actually the first import badge car to be classified domestic by the EPA.
Ooh, pretty car. Is it a Mazda 626 DX? Has it got air conditioning, dual airbags?
We only got the 626 sedan, no more hatchback for us. And a revised MX-6 was also introduced, once again sharing mechanicals with the Ford Probe. A 2-liter 4-cylinder was standard on the DX and LX trims, with horsepower creeping up to 118, and the higher-end ES trim came with the new 2.5-liter V6, delivering 164 horses. This new V6 was highly regarded for its power and refinement. However, as a previous owner of a Ford Probe GT with this engine, they can be a huge pain to work on given the size of the engine compared to the small size of the engine bay. This generation 626 didn't receive as much critical acclaim as previous generations. However, it was praised for decent handling and a comfortable ride. But ultimately, it didn't quite have the presence or uniqueness as the previous gens. The North American 6th gen 626 arrived in '98 and featured an entirely different body than international versions. This Michigan-built 626 looked more like the previous gen than the international versions of this car. It was also substantially larger and heavier than the world versions.
You don't even know what make it is. You're about to choose a car on the basis of a glimpse, a turn of the head, a shimmer of metal that captures your eye. If that car is the new Mazda 626, you've made a rational decision. The all-new Mazda 626. Retooled, refined, reborn.
A 2-liter 4-cylinder came with the base model, and the 2.5-liter V6 was available in the top trim ES. But even while retaining the independent rear suspension, Mazda didn't really capture the sporty essence or unique vibe of previous gens. Edmunds said that it was a, quote, bland, bread-and-butter sedan that's not big enough for families and not sporty enough for enthusiasts. Ouch. Overall, it was a fine vehicle, but it didn't rise above the many other decent competitors of the era. It did receive an extremely minor facelift along with a few subtle changes, but sales were never really all that strong. The final Mazda 626 for the North American market rolled off the assembly line in 2002. And even though that was the end of the 626 name here in the States, the story doesn't quite end there. The successor to the 626 was the Mazda 6, also known as the Mazda Atenza in Japan. In the States, the first gen ran from 2003 to 2008, second gen until 2013, and the third gen until 2021. Ultimately, no Generation 626 was ever a sales leader, but for most model years, Mazda stayed true to their roots and ensured every 626 was injected with a fun-to-drive character. So, when it comes to classic cars, the Mazda 626 is rarely mentioned. Even though they were a touch sportier than your average car, they were mostly still treated like throwaway appliances. And when repair bills became greater than the value of the car, they often got parked or junked. It's likely that there aren't many of these left on the road. Like most basic utilitarian transportation from the 80s and 90s, they were never considered desirable or collectible. But now that most of these things are gone forever with their memories faded and their metal melted down into washing machines and patio furniture, there are some people that want to save these forgotten pieces of automotive history. The cars themselves may not have been all that memorable back in the day, but there are a ton of memories that people associate with them. Maybe their grandma owned one, or they got carted around in the back of a 626 when they were a kid. And that's exactly why I'm drawn to it. I like the idea of saving the underappreciated, the forgotten, the basic transportation, the cars that nobody thought to preserve. Perhaps it's worth saving a few of these unassuming little cars from the 80s and 90s so we can remember what normal people drove around in every day. So, what do you think of the 626? Which generation is your favorite? Which is your least favorite? That's going to be it for today. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. If you'd like to help support the show, please buy a Hello Road t-shirt or hat at helloroad.tv/shop. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.